Company GlaxoSmithKline's been granted European approval for a pre-pandemic vaccine to protect against the H5N1 strain of bird flu. It should act as a stopgap, significantly reducing sickness and the death toll if or when a human pandemic emerges. The company, which has been under something of a cloud since the row over its antidepressant drug Seroxat, believes the new vaccine marks a significant step forward in our ability to cope with the threat posed by avian flu. The chief executive, JP Garnier, told our colleague Jim Nocti how it would work.
The way this will be used is to boost the immune systems of the entire populations at risk once we are in an alert for a pandemic episode. So essentially, it's preparing people for the worst, and if the worst does occur, well then at least they have been prompted against the virus, the pandemic virus, and they are likely, highly likely, to resist much better to the infection than otherwise.
The strain of flu that people have been warned against, avian flu, is known as H5N1. Now, it's a nomenclature that people will be familiar with, but what if it mutates significantly away from that? Surely the truth is that this vaccine simply couldn't cope.
Well, the fact of the matter is, imagine a shotgun. If you shoot with a shotgun, you will have an effect in concentric circles around the target. We have already the evidence that some of the strains from the original H5N1 virus, the so-called Vietnam strain, some of those strains have drifted away. For instance, the Indonesian strain, which is very lethal, and yet our vaccine is effective not just against the Vietnam strain, but also the Indonesian strain. So, if the end result, if the virus that is responsible for the pandemic alert is even a cousin of H5N1, there will be a recognition in your immune system against this invader, and you will therefore have a stronger immune system and resist better than if you have not been vaccinated.
What's the point about this vaccine if there's an outbreak which looks as if it might develop into a pandemic? What then happens?
Well, then you start vaccinating the population with the vaccine we're talking about, the pre-pandemic vaccine. While we're doing this, of course, we would try to isolate and identify the new virus that has come on the scene and is creating the problem, and make vaccines against this particular virus. But clearly that takes 4 to 6 months. In the meantime, millions of people might die. So this is why it's important to stock up the pre-pandemic vaccine, put in place the processes to be able to vaccinate large segments of the population, wait for the red alert, and if the red alert occurs, immediately implement the plan of vaccinating with the pre-pandemic vaccine large segments of the population. That's why some countries have already bought this vaccine.
Now, in this matter, you're cooperating with governments around the world. You're arguing that your company, like others in the pharmaceutical industry, is helping to protect public health. In that sense, don't you think that companies like your own have an obligation to be open with the public if they're arguing that they're part of the protection? They must also be part of the system of civic society. They must let us know, as in the case of Seroxat, a controversial drug from your own company. We should know everything.
Well, I mean, I'm here with you. I mean, this is is the proof that we take seriously the need to inform the public, and we certainly see this as something that we're proud of.
So you say that the fact you're doing this interview is an indication of openness. Does that mean that all the information which GSK holds on the development of Seroxat will be put in the public domain?
Well, first and foremost, you should know that those trials have been available on the web for quite a bit of time. We were the first company to put thousands and thousands of clinical trials on the web, even though nobody was asking. So I think that this company has been...
But let me quote
if you let me finish maybe the answer, that would be helpful.
Do finish the answer and then I will come back. Yes.
Either you want me to answer the question or you don't, but if you do, let me just say that the company has given many proofs of trying to be as transparent as it can possibly be, and this is just an example.
Well, let me ask the question that was put to you by Kent Woods, Chief Executive of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Authority. He asked that everything relating to Seroxat should be released into the public domain, and he said this, and I quote him, "It requires your consent. The company GSK has regularly asserted that it has nothing to hide in this matter, so I should be grateful if you could confirm in writing to your consent of the release, that is, of all information."
And we have answered that letter, and we have indicated that we will handle the requests as they come. But you have to be a little bit realistic here. There are millions of documents, millions. We can't possibly just, throw them in the street and say, please take a look. So this has to be orchestrated, this has to be organized, the requests have to be specific, and we have always been open-minded about, giving the information that is required if and when it's asked.
Specific. The problem with specific requests...
Well, why don't you ask me a specific question, and then I'll be able to
let me
answer
ask you a specific... Well,
what do you want?
Well, the point about the regulators is that they don't know the specific questions unless they know what's available. What they want to know is precisely how much the company knew and when about the probable or possible bad effects of Seroxat. And they're saying that everything that might pertain to that should be put in the public domain. That's a pretty simple question from them, not from me. And my question to you is, will you accede to that request?
Well, let me answer the question. They've already seen it. I mean, for months and months, teams of dozens of people from this organization have gone through every file there is possibly on Paxil Seroxat and have been able to look at all this, and they have concluded, by the way, the company didn't do anything wrong, I remind you. So they have already seen all this data.
But the problem is that...
Sir, I think we should move on. If you don't mind, I think I've answered that question 3 times. I'm not going to answer it.
Well, let me ask you...
If you have other questions, please go on.
I will, but I've got a very specific...
You have been very specific, and I have been very specific. I think we're done with this topic, but I'd be glad to answer other questions if you have any.
I want to ask you one thing in response to what you just said, if I may, and then we can move on to a final question, which is that on the trials that were done in the 1990s, it's clear that it was only in 2003 that the MHRA was shown an analysis of the trials. Have they now seen, and can everyone now see, that which was withheld in those years? And can you say, and I know you're moving on, there's going to be a new head of the company, that in future such information will be available to those who have to take really quite important decisions about what should be available to the public and what shouldn't?
Well, I can't answer such a vague question. I mean, this case has been discussed and studied at length by the authorities. They're satisfied with their inquiry. The inquiry had a positive conclusion for the company. I think, you cannot talk about things that complicated in 2 minutes on an interview. But as far as the desire to be transparent, I think our record speaks for itself. So
can you say, Jean-Paul Garnier, that you want
it's not
to leave...
Jean-Paul, it's Jean-Pierre. Sir,
Jean-Pierre,
can we move on?
It's the last question.
I have to tell you that if we are going to talk about this subject forever and ever, it's kind of...
No, it's one last question. Jean-Pierre Garnier, let me ask you simply this. When you leave the company, do you believe that you're going to leave a company behind you which will, let's put it like this, be honest, so that that information which is released, which is asked for, that bears on the
sir, I'm not
safety...
interested in answering this question. We have dealt with this subject. Thank you very much for taking the time to hear about pandemic, and I wish you the best. Goodbye.
And you, goodbye.
Right.
That was
Jim
Jean-Pierre Garnier.
Speaking to the Chief Executive of GlaxoSmithKline.
18 minutes to 8 now. And a look at the newspapers. 2 stories that might make uncomfortable reading for Gordon Brown feature prominently this morning. The embryology bill returns to the Commons today, and the